Hey guys, this is Rabbit, and I want to talk about the Helminth functionality that's coming in Heart of Deimos. Because DE just released the list of abilities, we're going to be able to move from one Warframe to another, and that's going to inform what Warframes we want to go through the trouble of refarming out first. As I go through this list of movable abilities, I'm going to separate them out into two camps. The first one we're going to call early Beatles hits, and the other one we're going to call later Beatles hits. And don't get me wrong, Twist and Shout's a fine song, and Hard Day's Night is fine, but those songs are competing with Eleanor Rigby and Norwegian Wood. The reality of this list is that a lot of these Warframe abilities overlap, and when you're making a choice between overlapping abilities, you're going to gravitate towards a Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds that is more useful, more often, and in more circumstances, than to a Love Me Do. So let's get these two lists going. For those of you not aware of the new Helminth functionality, I've assembled this quick visual guide to describe how the process works. Let's get into it with Nova's Null Star. I'll feed Nova into the grinder eventually, but I do feel that Null Star has a fundamental design flaw in that it gets worse when you need it to work the best. When you're fighting a few enemies, then you'll lose a few Null Stars and lose a little bit of your damage reduction, and it's not that big a deal. But when you're fighting a large group, then those Null Stars are ticking off over time, and you're just losing damage reduction when you're completely surrounded and need that damage reduction the most. We normally alleviate this by using the mod for Molecular Prime that regens the Null Stars, but we're not going to have that obviously when we use this with other Warframes. So I think this is going to have to get looked at before we actually want to use it on other Warframes. We're going to flip-flop back and forth between early hits and later hits. So let's talk about Gauss's Thermal Sunder, which I think is going to be a sleeper hit in this contest of abilities. Thermal Sunder actually benefits from being taken away from Gauss, the opposite of what happens with Nova's Null Star. It benefits because we don't normally mod Gauss for range, but when you put this ability on a character that does have range, what you're going to have is a replacement for Ember's World on Fire. If you were to put this on an Equinox or a Nyx, you're going to be able to run around and set things on fire while they're confused and fighting each other or going to sleep in their beds. I can't wait to put this on Ember and have World on Fire back. Hopefully it will even benefit Ember's passive and make her more powerful as more things get set on fire. Baruch's Lull is another ability like Nova's Null Star that suffers for being removed from an otherwise synergistic group of abilities. For instance, Lull takes time to ramp up before it puts things to sleep, and you have to be close to them to do it. This isn't a problem for Baruch, who can be 100% invulnerable to damage, but no other Warframe can do that. So this is a dangerous proposition for every other Warframe in the game. I hope DE looks at this and maybe creates a mod that gives it some range or something that will alleviate some of the problems that other Warframes will have using this ability. Atlas's Petrify is going under the later hits, not because it's a particularly great crowd control, it's actually pretty awkward and limited, but the mod turns it into a loot ability, which means you can now turn any Warframe into a loot Warframe, which is at least interesting and unique in the set of abilities we've been handed. I just think it'll be fun to get into a loot group that already has a Korra and a Necros and say, yeah, I think I'll bring my loot Inaros. Let's get the heavy lifting out of the way. almost half of the abilities we're going to be able to transfer between Warframes are crowd control abilities that barely differentiate themselves. Titania's Spellbind, Korra's Ensnare, Nidus's Larva, Necros's Terrify, Ivara's Quiver, Gara's Spectro Rage, Inaros's Desiccation, Revenant's Reave, Wisp's Breach Surge, Harrow's Condemn, Banshee's Silence, Octavia's Resonator, Mag's Pull, Nyx's Mind Control, and Zephyr's Airburst are all crowd control abilities that have only minor variations to differentiate them. The two that I think come out on top that most people will use most often are Mesa's Shooting Gallery and Equinox's Rest and Rage. I like those two the best, but this is probably a matter of taste more than any rational argument. So I'm just going to list them the way I like them. Valkyries Warcry means that they're not nerfing melee, and in fact this will be welcome on any melee heavy frame. So if you run your Saren the way I run my Saren, and concentrate on Spores and Toxic Lash rather than Spores and Miasma, then yours and my Saren just doubled in power. I'm going to include Lokis Decoy in the early hits because it so unfairly compares with another ability we're going to be given, Saren's Molt. And this highlights the problem with overlapping abilities. Saren's Molt and Lokis Decoy get used in exactly the same circumstances, but Saren's Molt is just plain better. So I don't think this ability is going to see very much play at all. So let's hope that DE takes a look at Decoy and either mods it or maybe even gives us a different ability from Loki to solve that problem. I feel compelled to include Chroma's Elemental Ward because while there isn't a lot of interesting synergy to talk about, it's just a flat-out win for every fragile Warframe in the game. Any Warframe you're trying to take into high-level content will benefit from the amazing increase in defense you can squeeze out of Elemental Ward. Ash's Shuriken. Now, in a perfect world, we'd have gotten Nyx's Psychic Bolts that you can ramp up to 100% armor strip rather than Shuriken, but the 70% armor strip you get off of the mod for this will still allow us to mod our weapons away from corrosion and heat so often, and towards more optimal setups. Which means that while this isn't perfect, it's good enough to get into the early hits list, because it'll effectively fill gaps in some Warframes kits. Rhino's Roar is the other uncontested win along with Chroma's Elemental Ward and fills out the other side of the equation. So where Elemental Ward gives us a way to fortify our fragile glass cannon Warframes, Roar is going to give us a way to take tank frames and allow them to clear high-level content quickly and effectively. There aren't really meaningful synergies here. This just helps a lot of Warframes break out of their niche, which is what I was hoping to see. Limbo's Banish. I'm including this under the early hits because I don't see a lot of great synergy with other Warframes kits, but the first thing I'm going to do when Heart of Deimos launches is unapologetically, without remorse, heave a Limbo into the Helminth, put that Banish ability on Loki, and then use Loki from now on to run rescue missions. Stealth in, banish the rescue target, stealth out. We are never going to see a failure screen after a rescue mission again. This does have the unfortunate side effect that now Limbo's sole responsibility is running the spy mission on Lua. I'm going to stop the list there for time, because I think we've covered the abilities that we'll see the most. There are other good abilities. Protea's Dispensary is good for support-oriented people. Ember's Fire Blast is another great armor stripper that also heals you. Hildren's Pillage is good. Oberon's Smite might let us take some other frames to idle on hunts. But I think we've gotten through the most interesting abilities. So I hope this list gives you some ideas for some fun synergies to play with when Heart of Deimos comes out. And I hope I see you in game. Good luck, guys.